everyone, I'm Chanchal Agrawal from Eastern Financiers, and today we are going to discuss a very interesting investment idea. India. Surprised? Don't be, because I'm going to tell you exactly why you need to invest in India for the next decade. From less than $3 per capita GDP at the time of independence, we have moved to $2,000 per capita GDP in these 75 years. Last 15 years, almost 3 million people have been lifted out of poverty. So what did India do, and specifically what did India do differently in these last 2 years? We are just going to discuss right now. The first point, pandemic surplus. So G7 countries, and largely both developing and emerging countries, declared a pandemic surplus anywhere between 19 to 35% of their GDP. Japan was as high as 53% of the GDP. What is the India number? In fact, India was criticized to declare a surplus of just 3.5% of GDP. Why were we different? So all these economies were looking at the demand side of the equation, right? So they were releasing money, they were giving these paychecks to their masses, while India, not only looking at the demand side, looked at the supply side of the equation as well. So via these, Aadhaar linked Jan Dhan bank accounts, lots of monies were given to the vulnerable side, but also the micro and small organizations were protected by giving these loan guarantees to the masses, and this was the defining point for India. Today, when we look 2 years down the line, all these economies which gave these fat checks to their masses are looking at almost 4x their normal inflation. Had India done something similar, our inflation would have been as high as 18 to 20%, which would have been massive on our back rows. The second point, energy security. India is the third largest importer of oil. We almost import 80% of their requirements, right? So we are really dependent on oil price, on the oil price volatility, oil price movement, supplier, everything. Now, what did we do differently over here? After the entire Ukraine-Russia crisis, we shifted our imports. We, barely importing, we used to import barely negligible from Russia. We have moved it to almost 12% of their requirements. At the peak of sanction, we were importing oil with a discount as high as $30 from Russia, right? So that's a big advantage on our fiscal numbers. What did we do? Did we pass on that benefit to our customers? Did we pass on the discount to our customers? Yes and no. So very smartly, what the government did was, they increased and decreased their excise duty at regular levels to take care not only of the inflation and not only of the consumption, but also of the fiscal deficit side of the equation, and which is yielding results right now. Had we passed on the entire benefit to our masses, today the consumption number and the inflation numbers would have been much different. Second point, in energy security, India is aware that it is dependent on other countries for oil, and it needs to develop a plan B, and that's exactly what they are doing. So the target is to increase the nuclear capacity, or the nuclear energy as we call it, by 3x from now till 2031. In fact, in long run, India is targeting to have nuclear about 25% of the total energy demand. Again, that's very massive and a step in good direction. Third, and this is the most important point, India was always the land of exports, industrialization, manufacturing, that was our core. But over these past years, due to competition from these low-cost manufacturing economies, from a manufacturing export, we have migrated slowly to a service export economy. And this is changing now. Let me tell you, iPhone 14 production has now been partly shifted to India, and that is big. Mobile phone production is expected to increase 5 times over the next 5 years. In fact, India could be one of the largest exporter of mobile phones globally. Companies like Samsung, Wistron, Foxconn are shifting their manufacturing base to India. And look at these capacity utilization numbers. We have now reached 75.3% on capacity utilization. Now, historically it is said between 75 to 80% of the capacity utilization is where you need to start capex for the next decade. If numbers are to be believed, the projected capex for the next 5 years is going to be 6x of what it was in the last 5 years. Again, this is a very massive number to look at. India's export is targeted to grow by 15% CAGR versus 5 to 10% pre-pandemic. In fact, Morgan Stanley says that India's exports could be as high as 22% of the global exports in the current year. Now that's very big and very positive. Food securities. Now India is one of the largest producers and largest exporter of food items like milk, wheat, groundnut, sugarcane, pulses, etc. So there is ample food security in India's hand. Next point, credit growth. So what did developed economies do since GFC? Where did the debt go? The debt actually was not productive. It was only the debt that was raised to refinance the old debt. Vis-a-vis, what did India do differently out here? Last decade, they have concentrated only on cleaning up the corporate balance sheets, establishing a bankruptcy law, cleaning up their banks, establishing a bad bank, and what not. This is exactly yielding the results right now. The credit growth in India this year has been as high as 15.5%, and this is a 9-year high. At the time where capacity utilization is increasing, we are looking at increased manufacturing, there is a massive infrastructure growth. The cleanup exercise is what will be very beneficial when we plan our next decade of growth. Taxes. Now this one is really important. Corporate taxes were cut from a weighted average of 35% to 26%. What was the impact? It increased the top line by 19% for 4,000 listed companies. In fact, retrospective amendments which discouraged a lot of FDI money has now been completely cleared off. Infrastructure growth. There is lot of impetus on infrastructure growth. Defense, railways, roadways are the focus area for this government. Now the next point that I'm going to say is very relevant. So India contributes to almost 3.1% of the global GDP. But look at this, our exports are just 1.6% of the global GDP, and that was largely because of low-cost countries like China, etc. contributing to that larger GDP. Now think of this, if China is taking a back seat, developed economies like UK, Europe, etc. have their own sense of slowdown. Is there a manufacturing growth that will come to India? Second point that you need to think about. Despite contributing about 3.1% to the global GDP, the portfolio allocation that came to India was as minuscule as 0.2%. Now think of this. Everywhere there is a growth slowdown, interest rates are rising. Do you think in this scenario there is a chance that money could come to India? My bet is yes. The last point, valuations. And now I understand India is expensive when you compare it to other emerging market peers. Our forward PE is about 20.6 versus 11.3 for other emerging market peers. So yes, we quote a premium. But look at this. The market cap for India dropped by 1.4% in this entire mammoth year. What was the number for other peers? That was 14% drop. So it really makes sense that there is a premium attached to the India valuations. Before I complete this video, there are certain risks that I certainly want to point out right now. The first and foremost is recession. We are not recession proof, right? So if there is a recession happening globally, it would be exported to India as well. Second one, oil. We are very, very dependent on oil volatility, oil price, oil supplier. So if there is something on that side, we will be affected. Third point, job creation. The unemployment was actually very high in India during the times of pandemic. And in fact, pre-pandemic as well, we had very high unemployment numbers which actually increased in pandemic. The unemployment is as high as 7 to 8%, and that's only with 40% of our population working, right? Trade protection. Yes, we are inviting people to come and manufacture in our country, but import barriers are still very high, which could destroy the entire bilateral trade. So what's the conclusion? Beyond demographics and beyond middle class, we have a very interesting story to play in India for the next decade. There is rising industrialization, there is infrastructure, there is rising capex, there is a rising middle class, and we have a friendly partner to give us oil with certain discounts. So are you excited? Because I am very excited to invest for the next decade in India. Stay tuned because we are going to discuss a lot of such interesting topics in our next video. Do subscribe to our channel, and for more information visit www.easternfin.com. Thank you.